All right, welcome back. Glad you're still sticking out with us. Congratulations. A lot of times I say the first 5 sections are the hardest for people to get through. If you stick around through session 6, you should be getting on a roll. You've learned some vocabulary. We're definitely getting deeper and deeper into the material. It's all really starting to build on each other at this point. So stick with it. Don't get discouraged. Keep learning, keep growing, open up your mind to some new concepts. So this section is all about deeds and transferring and recording title to real estate. So we've talked about property, we've talked about rights. Now let's talk about title. I want to tell you a story, one of my favorite real-life real estate stories. I've been licensed in real estate originally since 1995, so don't do the math on that one, but in any other profession I'd have like a gold watch and retirement program by now. So I've been selling real estate for quite some time, and of course have been an instructor now for over 12 years. One of my favorite real estate stories, I sold a house to a man of Spanish descent. His name was Rogelio Abrahams. I'm sure I do a horrible job of pronouncing that correctly, but sold a house to him, and I remember the wife and myself were inside doing an inspection. Rogelio and his uncle were outside in the driveway, and the home inspection going on the inside, and I just remember him out in the driveway with his uncle, and he was doing this like he's driving down the road, and he opens the mailbox, he closes the mailbox, he opens the flag, puts the flag down, puts something in the mailbox, and it just stuck in my head, what is he doing out there at the mailbox? And I asked him, if you don't mind me asking, what was the conversation you were having with your uncle in the mailbox? And I mean, to this day, I get goosebumps to talk about it. And he said, well, I was explaining to him how the mail works. He said, we are in Ecuador and you don't have mail. He said, nobody in my family has ever owned their own property. He said, so it's a really neat concept to us that they bring me my mail at my house. So imagine that background, how important the concept of home ownership is to him. Of course, we take that lightly. So now advance forward. We're going to talk about title. We get to the closing. He buys his first house. He's got all of his closing documents. He gets the keys. He goes home. And remember, they're Spanish descent. At the time, I had an assistant that worked with me that spoke fluid Spanish. He actually grew up in Ecuador also. So I get a call about 2 weeks later from Rogelio. And he is, he was freaking out. I mean, he was just going nuts. And he said, Marlene, I'm so upset. I can't find my title. I can't find my title. I don't know where it is. I know I bought an insurance plan on my title. What do I have to do to get my title replaced? Because I don't have it. And I was trying my best to explain to him and had to bring in Andy, my assistant, to speak to him in Spanish to make sure he got it. In his mind, he did not own that property if he wasn't holding that piece of paper. He thought his title was his piece of paper with his name on it that said he owned the property. And I completely understood that that's what you would think. You pay off your car, you get your title in your hand. But remember, I already said that title passes personal property, but in real estate, title is more of a concept. Title is a concept of ownership. So I had to have Andy explain to him that the title isn't a piece of paper. Your title that you did buy an insurance policy is not just the piece of paper. It is your concept of ownership. All of those rights. If your next door neighbor walks over and knocks on the door and says, hey, I'm allowed to use your backyard because I have a right to it, that would be an interference with your title, your concept of ownership. So title is a concept of ownership. In this chapter, we're going to get into deeds. Deed is an actual piece of paper that is recorded at the county courthouse, but I want you to think about it this way, that a deed is a verb. The deed isn't necessarily just the piece of paper. In and of itself, it doesn't do much. The deed is actually a transference document. Grantor to grantee. The grantor is the seller. Grantee is the buyer, the new person receiving the deed. And the grantor signs that deed over. The grantee accepts it, and transference of that property ownership has happened once that takes place, and then that deed, the piece of paper, is on file at the county recorder's office in the county where the property is located. So title is your concept of ownership. The deed is the piece of paper that makes that transfer happen, and then we have to have a record of it. So that record is kept at the county courthouse in the county where the title or where the deed is located, at the county office where the property is located. Forgive me. So let's talk about some differences. You're going to hear about legal title and equitable title, because remember, title is no longer that piece of paper. Title is your concept of ownership. So if I hold legal title to a property, I am the legal owner. If I hold equitable title to a piece of property, it just means I have some future financial interest. So maybe I'm buying your house from you and I write a contract. We have an agreement for me to buy that property. I am said to have equitable title. Do I own it yet? No, because remember, title is a concept. But equitable title means I could have a future financial interest in the ownership of that property itself. All right, so we're going to get into a lot more terms, but I think that basic introduction is really going to help you to know the differences as you read through the concepts, because it can get kind of muddled because of the way we typically talk about ownership of property and the terminology. So I said that the deed has to be signed by the grantor, accepted by the grantee. Let's camp out there for just 1 second. You're going to see lots and lots of ORs and EEs in this material. Grantor, grantee is the first one you're going to get into in this section. Whenever you see an OR, I want you to think that's the creator, the person who started the process. Remember I said that when you're selling a property, the grantor, grant, I'm making a grant to you, right? So the grantor would be the seller creating that process. The EE on the end is always going to be the person receiving, or the entity receiving something. What's the grantee receiving? He's receiving title to the property. So OR, creator, EE is receiving, and again, that's going to help it make more sense, because you're going to see trustor, trustees, mortgagor, mortgagors, lessees, lessors. Going to have to make sense of all the ORs and EE, so hopefully that'll help you to build a foundation. So the next thing, whenever we do transfer a deed, just signing it isn't good enough. And you're going to realize in this chapter that the grantee doesn't even have to sign the deed. Don't even have to have your signature on it. The grantor, remember the deed's a verb, so the grantor signs his name to start the process of transferring ownership. The grantee only has to receive that deed during their lifetime and, of course, have that recorded to put the world on notice that it is their property. And once that happens, then the deed transference or conveyance is said to have taken place. Of course, those deeds are recorded at the courthouse so that everybody can know, the world is on notice that you have the ownership of that property. But let's talk about another thing that comes up. I've signed over the deed. It's been recorded at the courthouse, but maybe you never moved in. Either you have to move into the property or record the deed to put the world on notice to make that ownership final. So you have to record the deed or move in, and that gives what we call constructive notice to the world that you are now the new owner of record of the property. There are different types of deeds. You're going to see a few different times in this material the word statutory. Statutory always means it's just an act of law. Because the law says it, it exists. So you've got statutory deeds, you have statutory liens, different things. So when you see statutory, just remember the law created it. So because of an act of law, that's what it is. There's several different types of statutory deeds. You'll also have you'll also have special purpose deeds. Different reasons that you could have a special purpose deed. So it's not always just a voluntary, hey, I want to sell the house to you. There are other reasons sometimes that title transfers to property also. Also, we have to remember that another encumbrance or another interference with our personal property, complete ownership, taxes. You're going to learn a little bit about transfer tax. We'll go into deeper detail and actually learn how to compute transfer tax in a later chapter, but you'll learn the basis of transfer tax. Anytime a deed transfers from one person to another, of course, somebody has to pay a little bit of money for that to make sure that those government charges are taken care of. Next way to transfer property, what if I'm not alive anymore and I have a property that I want to turn over to somebody? Hopefully I have a will in place, and my will would determine the transfer of that property. And if I die intestate, which means without a will, then the state where the property is located can step in, try to find heirs, give that property to them, or my heirs can petition the state to have that deed transferred. I know it's a horrible thing to say, but deceased people can't sell houses. And whoever the owner of record is on the deed has to be around to be able to transfer that property ownership. So remember that too. The legal owner of record has to be the grantor. If that grantor is mentally incompetent or deceased, there are legal actions that have to be taken place before the transfer of title can happen. And you'll learn about this in that chapter also, parts of that probate process. So there are voluntary transfers of title. You know, I can have a volunteer, you're going to volunteer for it and you're starting that process, and also involuntary transfers of title. You didn't really sign up for it, it just happened, and you'll learn a little bit more in detail about that. But I want to ask you this. Make sure that you know what would happen to Joe's property if he passed away in your state. Different states are different. How would that be decided? What would happen if he had a wife, children, and a will? What happened if he had no will? What happened if he owned businesses? So your state-specific content will probably dive a little bit deeper into that. But remember, there's national coverage that are all the topics, no matter which state you live in, and also state-specific rules on transferring title. So enjoy this session, learn a little bit more about how title processes from one person to another, and we'll see you again next session.